Let's get right to CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett, who joins us now from the White House. Okay, Major, I think we had heard that there were sort of dueling camps about this accord within the White House, that some people were encouraging the president to pull out, others wanted him to stay. What can you tell us?
Over the weekend, there were several conversations at the presidential level and with senior White House staff about how to deal with this issue. And the president made it clear he wants to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord, and he told those participating in these meetings that what he wants the United States to do and what he intends to signal is an effort to renegotiate the contours, the protocols of the Paris Climate Accord, which in general sets a goal globally. More than 190 nations have signed on to this, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with a goal of preventing a 2 degrees centigrade or 3.6 degree Fahrenheit increase in global temperatures. Now, it's a completely voluntary set of protocols. There is no international law, because if there had been, this treaty would have had to submit it to the United States Senate. President Obama knew that was a political non-starter. So when the United Nations put together this entire effort on the Paris Climate Accord, it did so principally with an idea toward the political difficulties in the United States. It was a big concession not to make this a product of international law and to make it a voluntary system. Even so, this president believes that the goals set forward for the United States and the protocols for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are simply too onerous on American industry, will cost too many jobs, and he's going to suggest, I'm told, that there be a renegotiation of the contours, the protocols of the Paris Climate Accord. There is no indication that I've been able to detect so far how receptive European nations and other signatories will be to this, but that's where this is heading from this administration. Pull out of the United States and see if you can renegotiate.
So, Major, how will the White House try to sell this to opponents and to our allies? What kind of messaging will we hear?
That is in development. The decision more or less has been made that he wants to pull the United States out of it. Remember, this was a campaign commitment also from candidate Trump. He was unambiguous about this. Take the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. And there's been a considerable amount of advertising as this decision has sort of been a jump ball within the White House, within the energy sector of the United States, saying, hey, Mr. President, keep your promise to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. So the White House has been feeling a little bit of that external political pressure on this. How it's announced, how it will be messaged, that's all being debated within the West Wing right now, but the decision has been made.
So, Major, let's turn to Russia and its list of more than 24 names that the House Intelligence Committee wants to speak to. Including in that list is a former Trump aide, also Trump's personal lawyer. Walk us through this now. What's the next step? We know the president tweeted this morning that this investigation was a witch hunt. Where do we go from here?
So there are the congressional investigations, principally the Senate one, widening the net to try to find out all relevant participants to talk to. And just because you're being asked a set of questions by the Senate Intelligence Committee doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, doesn't mean you're likely to become a part of the FBI investigation. It just means you are someone the Senate wants to question. And the methodology of that can be somewhat legally complicated. In the case of Michael Cohen, who was the attorney for the Trump Organization and someone very close to the Trump campaign as it made its way to the Republican nomination and ultimately the White House, Michael Cohen initially resisted voluntary requests that he submit information. He's now made it clear through his attorney that if there is a formal subpoena, he will comply. So some in the Trump world want there to be a subpoena process that's very specific, that's very detailed in what it is seeking from these potential witnesses. Others are willing to testify openly and voluntarily about lots of things. Carter Page is one of the people who falls into that category. Carter Page, if you listen to the Trump campaign, was a very low-level, highly insignificant person who had a very brief relationship with the Trump campaign. If you remember, as I do, what Carter Page said about himself at the time, he was a significant person who spoke to the president, or the candidate rather, routinely on foreign policy and was a heavyweight advisor. This is all subject to interpretation and revision. But now Carter Page says he'd like to testify before Congress. Congressional Democrats have signaled they're no longer interested in him. He says that proves that Democrats are only interested in witnesses that might muddy up the waters on this, not witnesses who can provide evidence to prove there was no collusion between anyone in the Trump campaign and the Russians, All of this is being fought somewhat in the courtroom of public opinion and some in the procedural way of seeking witness testimony, either through a voluntary request or subpoenas. Many, many more steps need to go on. And as I've said many times on this program, this is a story that's going to percolate for a long time because the underlying questions are very difficult to obtain evidence on, and even if there is evidence obtained, to piece that together in any way, shape, or form that might constitute a crime or something that you could successfully prosecute as a crime. None of those determinations have been made. This is all still very much in the evidence gathering phase. And for those on the Trump side, they argue much more is being alleged than is being proven, or even at a basic level established with any form of hard evidence. That's the central Trump grievance about all these stories. They sound bad, but there's no evidence behind them. A story like this will have to take a long time for the evidence, in some cases, if there is any, to catch up with the headlines.
Major, before we let you go, obviously we have to ask you about, I've been saying covfefe, I've heard co-fifi.
I say co-fifi.
You say, Anne-Marie says co-fifi, you say corn cob.
Yeah, I landed
well.
on corn cob. That's where I'm sticking. I'm not moving from corn cob.
But
it's summertime, I can say it on live television without any hesitation. That's where I'm landing.
I'm going to land there with you as well. But here's a sort of a serious question behind it, Major. What are the reports about President Trump sharing his personal number with world leaders? Is the phone that he's using the tweet on, is the phone number that he's giving to world leaders, is that a secure phone? Perhaps you can explain to the American people what the mechanics are with the technology the president is using to tweet and to make calls.
So I don't know with 100% confidence if the president has created a separate cell phone. I highly, highly, highly doubt that. But I haven't asked that question directly, and I haven't gotten a direct answer to that question. But it would be as unusual as anything I can imagine. A cell phone would be an encrypted device. President Obama liked to keep his BlackBerry. As someone who still has a BlackBerry, I understand that deeply because I love my BlackBerry. It was an encrypted device, meaning it had all of the same protections and encrypted barriers to hacking that anything else had. It's not in that respect different from a hardline phone. So when you see the president telephoning someone at the Resolute desk and there's the photograph that everyone looks at, on a cell phone, that communication is essentially, for all practical purposes and security purposes, the same. I'm not certain why a cell phone conversation on an encrypted device would be fundamentally different from a security point of view than one on a hardline. And wherever the president is, he's president of the United States. That's true for every American president, whether they're on the golf course, whether they're on vacation, whether they're in the Oval Office, or whether they're on Air Force One. You're never not president of the United States, and you're never not in possession of the world's most elaborate communication system. So that story confused me last night, that there's some sort of security concern about world leaders calling the president on his cell phone. I don't get it because I'm not familiar in my history of covering the White House with any device that's outside of the typical and very highly structured security apparatus, whatever the phone type is.
All right, Major, just so you know, Donald Trump just tweeted, I will be announcing my decision on the Paris Accord over the next few days. Make America great again. That just came in. It doesn't sound like, I know you've been reporting that he's made that decision. Why is he tweeting that he will make it over the next couple of days?
Because they're working out the methods of how to explain it and what it is and what they're trying to do. And what I think they're going to try to do and what I sense in my reporting is, if you're going to pull out, you better have some sort of explanation as to not only why, but what you intend to do going forward. And like the president did with the North American Free Trade Agreement, threatened to pull out, then seek to renegotiate, there's an effort, and because the United States is not only symbolically, but practically from an economic and greenhouse gas emissions point of view, a very important signatory to the Paris Climate Accord, if the president announces he's decided to pull out, maybe he begins some negotiations to determine what the contours might be of a renegotiated Paris Climate Accord, or if that's even possible. So he also knows, and the White House knows, that with this news this morning, it has been deluged with diplomats all over the world saying, wait a minute, more than 190 nations have signed on to this. What are you doing? What are the implications of that? And they don't have all those answers yet. So, and as we've also learned, when he says a couple of days, he could mean a couple of hours. We don't know. But I'm told over the weekend he made it clear that he was going to pull the United States out of it. That was more or less the body language we were getting on the overseas trip during the G7 and NATO meetings, by the way. They were saying, well, we haven't decided yet, but there was nothing that the White House was suggesting in its public comments or anything on the side that there was a serious reappraisal of this, that he had moved away from his hard and fast campaign commitment to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. And so this would be consistent with where this president has always been, and he's just trying to find a way to explain how he's landed.
Major Garrett, we thank you so much for your reporting, Major. Thanks.
Sure.